We're gonna be talking about all of the books that I read in January. So this is the first monthly reading wrap up that I've ever done on this channel. I'm gonna try to do them every month. Hopefully, we'll see. These are some of my favorite book videos to watch on YouTube, so I don't know why it's taking me so long to do them, but here we are. So first book of the year was a great one. We started off the year strong. The Grace Year by Kim Ligget. Ligget. It's so awkward when you don't know how to say authors' names. So this book really took me by surprise, honestly. This one ended up being a 4.5 stars, rounded up to 5 stars, so I'm just gonna say 5 stars. So this is a young adult dystopian book. It's best described as The Handmaid's Tale meets The Hunger Games. I heard a lot of people also refer to it kind of like a blend of Handmaid's Tale and Lord of the Flies. I've never read Lord of the Flies. I do know some basic things about it, and that's probably also a very accurate representation of what this book is about. I think that if you are a big fan of The Handmaid's Tale, the show or the books, that you would really enjoy this one. So in this world, women are believed to have magical powers that start to present themselves at the age of 16. These magical powers are really dangerous for society. So they're sent away for a whole year out on their own to rid themselves of this magic. And this is called the Grace Year. And nobody really knows what happens during the Grace Year because it's forbidden to talk about. And you're following one of these girls in her 16th year going through her Grace Year. So even though this is a young adult book, I will say it feels very mature, like a very mature YA. Honestly, if I didn't know that it was young adult, I would probably just assume it was adult fiction or an adult dystopian. There's some crazy stuff that happens in this, some crazy dark stuff, I will say. Definitely not for the faint of heart. It's not that crazy, obviously, because it still is young adult, but there is some wild stuff that happens here. This book was just so thought-provoking and emotional and heart-wrenching at times, and I just was not expecting it. It feels like every sentence or just every paragraph, everything she says was intentional and it has deeper meanings throughout. And I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it so much. My only complaint though for this book is I wish it would have been stretched out a lot longer. I feel like this is one that could have been stretched out into like a trilogy or at least a duology. There was just so much that went on in this book and so many different plot points that you kind of breezed through. Not necessarily in a bad way because like I said, I still loved this book, but it would have been nice to see them explored a little bit more. And also there's so much of this world and this lore that we didn't really get to know that much. And it could be intentional because, you know, like these girls and just this society in general, they're kept very in the dark about a lot of stuff in the outside world. So maybe that was kind of the point, but there's just so much lore, extra lore to this world that we just really didn't explore that much that I would have really loved to see. And that could have been done maybe in another book or just a series in general. So the next book I read was actually an audiobook. I read a lot of audiobooks this month. I don't know if I was just like in an audiobook mood or whatnot, but I think majority of these are gonna be audiobooks. So this one is The Drowning Woman by Robyn Harding, and I'm just saying up front, I didn't enjoy this one that much. This I think was a 2-star, and the premise of this thriller is a homeless woman who is spending the night in like a wealthier neighborhood. She sleeps in her car, so she's parked in this wealthier neighborhood, and one day she sees this wealthier looking woman about to drown herself in the lake, and she goes in and saves her life. And that's kind of the basis of the story. And just from the synopsis of this one and the way it was described, I was kind of expecting something a lot darker and a lot twistier and a lot more psychological, and it was none of these things. It was not very dark, it was not very twisty, it was not very psychological. Honestly, it kind of just felt more like a fiction book with like darker-ish twang on it. And the whole time that I was listening to it, it just kept feeling like nothing was really happening while things were happening, but like nothing was happening, which for me is just not something that I want to see in a thriller book. Like I just want it to be fast-paced, crazy, things happening all the time, reveals. That's just what I personally look for in a thriller book, and if it's not that way, I really want it to like super deep dive psychologically, or you know, just like something more, I guess, than just kind of mundane everyday life. And that's what this book was. There was a lot of mundane everyday kind of life moments. You had like this cloud overhead of a thriller book, but it just wasn't very thrilling. I think that if I would have just been reading the physical book of this one, I probably would have DNF'd it. I only kept going because I used my Audible credit and I didn't want to waste it, but I listened to it like at really quick speed just to get through to the end. So I just think that there's probably better thrillers out there. Something though I am discovering about myself, because I have been diving deeper into thrillers lately, I think some people do prefer thrillers that kind of feel more kind of classic mystery books, not so dark and twisty, but you have like an air of what's gonna happen next surrounding a story. But for the most part, it's just kind of like a general fiction type story, especially in terms of domestic thrillers. For me, I like the crazy stuff. Like, I like it to be just wild, plot twists everywhere. That's what I like in a thriller. So maybe this is just more of a personal preference thing, but there's another book on this list later in the video that also kind of falls into this, and I'll talk about that one in a little bit. Next book, wait, I need to change angle. Next up, we have American Kingpin by Nick Bilton, and this was another audiobook because I'm in my audiobook era. Oh, that was so cringe. Oh my gosh, what did I say? And this one was a non-fiction, which is something I haven't really explored that much lately, if ever. I don't read a lot of non-fiction, but it's something that I do want to start reading more of here and there. I'm still a fiction lover first and foremost, and that's kind of like my go-to first choice. But if there's a non-fiction book that seems interesting to me, I'm gonna try to read more of them. So this book in particular actually really reads like a fiction book. It reads like a crime thriller. So if you're a type of person that doesn't really like nonfiction, or you're kind of nervous about it, this might be a good one. Or just books that are more narrative nonfiction in general, because they tend to read more like a story. And this book in particular is about Ross Ulbricht, who founded the website The Silk Road. So The Silk Road was this website, an illegal website, an illegal marketplace where you could essentially buy and sell anything without the eyes of the government on you, without risk of potentially getting into legal trouble, or so Ross Ulbricht thought at first when he founded it. The real main focus of this marketplace was the sale of drugs. This was a really big thing when it happened back in like, I think 2012 or so, because I mean, I guess spoiler alert, even though this is nonfiction and this is like real life, he did eventually get caught, and the book does go into that too, but it kind of starts from the beginning of his journey, why he founded it, how he did it, how he evaded the police for so long, made this entire massive empire, making so much money online, and then his capture. It's really a crazy story, and it's wild that it's a true story because it literally feels like you're reading like a fictional crime story. So this is not a topic that I was ever interested in, honestly, or ever really cared to learn more about. Like, I didn't really even know much about the Silk Road at all. I think I had heard about it, but I didn't really even know what it was, honestly. But just the way that this book was written, and just kind of the structure of it, I guess, kept me really invested, and it just got me interested in this topic that I literally knew nothing about. If you're a true crime fan, this would probably be a great book for you. Great audiobook. The audiobook was very well done. I did end up giving this one a 4 stars. It wasn't 5 because certain parts of the story felt a little over-explained and started to get a little bit repetitive and drag on just a little bit. I feel like some of it maybe could have been condensed a little bit more. And I will say that it was really nice to read something out of my comfort zone, and this has made me want to read more nonfiction in general. Next up, we have a book I didn't like. This is Beneath Black Sails by Clare Sager? This one was disappointing because the premise was so freaking interesting and I was so excited. I saw it and I freaked out because the premise was pirates meets fae. Like, they're pirate fae. Like, these fae are pirates, and oh my gosh, I love reading about fae and I love reading about pirates, so this sounded perfect, and it was fantasy romance, so I like died inside. And then I died inside in a bad way when I didn't like the book that much. This sounds so harsh, I'm sorry. My hopes got up, okay? My hopes got up, I was so excited. The concept was so good, and the execution was just not there, unfortunately. The main character in this book kind of annoyed me. She kind of gave off Mary Sue vibes, to be honest. Like, don't get me wrong, I love reading about strong female characters in books, but I like reading about them when they are strong for a reason, you know? Like when they're a well-rounded character, they also could have flaws. Like it just, I feel like this character was lacking something. There just was something there and I just didn't really like her that much. I didn't really relate to her that much. She was just kind of good at everything for no reason. For me, those just aren't the types of characters I really like reading about. I like, you know, kind of like the hero's journey, I guess, is the best way to describe it. But that's just me. I don't know, maybe some people have different opinions about that. She just very much lacked emotional depth. And other aspects of the story itself were just kind of confusing, a little bit convoluted. It started off really good and the book was really exciting and she kind of felt like a female Jack Sparrow, like just based on her personality, but it just kind of went downhill. Like I said, aspects of it were confusing, didn't really make sense. Like a lot of the power system kind of didn't fully make sense. Then you got introduced to the love interest and I actually did like his character too, but then I just quickly kind of got bored of him too and just bored of the story in general. And the thing that really kind of sent it home was there was just a big miscommunication trope, but like kind of a dumb miscommunication trope. Oh my gosh, I'm sorry. Like dumb in the sense that they miscommunicated on something for a very dumb reason and it like caused so much problems based on this thing that they just literally could have easily talked about. It could have been resolved in a sentence, but no, it got miscommunicated and half the book was that. I feel like a lot of people share the same sentiments about the miscommunication trope in general. Like a lot of times it's just more frustrating than anything. I think if done right, it could be really cool, but it has to be done in the way that the miscommunication makes sense or else it's just so frustrating because like if they would have just sat down for like 5 seconds and been like, oh, you thought I meant that? I meant this. Problem solved, you know? So I ended up skimming through to the end just because I wanted to know how it finished, but honestly, I kind of almost wanted to just DNF it. I did end up giving this one a 2 stars just because the premise was so unique and interesting for me, and the beginning started off really great, but it just kind of fell flat and didn't really live up to what I expected. And for the last book I read this month, it was None of This Is True by Lisa Jewell. I kind of feel like this one maybe shouldn't have been named None of This Is True because then the whole time you know none of something is true, even though it doesn't really spoil anything, but like, I don't know. It would have been cooler to like not know that nothing is true, but then also the things that aren't true don't make sense. I'm not making sense. This book made me not make sense. Hold on, let's just like go back to the beginning. So I had a lot of high expectations for this book. This is a thriller. Lisa Jewell is a very popular thriller author, and this was my first Lisa Jewell book. And unfortunately, I was just a little bit disappointed. I did enjoy this thriller more than The Drowning Woman that I also read this month, but kind of just by a little bit. So the premise of this book is that you have this woman who is a podcaster, and she likes to interview other successful women or just like interesting women in general, and that's kind of the point of her podcast. And so one day, she goes out to dinner for her birthday. It's her 45th birthday, and there she meets this other woman who is also having her birthday at this restaurant. Her exact same birthday, her 45th birthday, and they found out that they were born on the same day at the same exact hospital. And they're like, whoa, we're birthday twins. It kind of goes from there. That's how the connection starts. And eventually she gets on her podcast to interview her, and they're gonna make a whole segment called Birthday Twins. I think the thing that really got me interested in this book originally was the whole podcast element, and the audiobook was extremely well done. It felt like a big production. There was sound effects. Like it felt like you were listening to a podcast at times. So I will say that the audiobook was great, but the story just fell flat. The audiobook is way better than the story itself. I thought that overall it was just okay. The ending was kind of lackluster and wasn't all that exciting, and it just kind of left me confused, honestly, which maybe was the point, but also just felt a little bit unsatisfying. This one does also have some disturbing content, I will say. A big focus of this book is a certain topic that not everybody might want to read about this topic. I don't want to spoil it because it is part of like certain reveals, but I would probably look up content warnings for this one. I also do feel like certain said topics maybe were handled kind of a little bit in a strange way. I know that that's kind of a common thing that I was reading about in reviews too. Like it just kind of felt just a little bit weird. I don't know if that was necessarily the intention. I think that it could have just been because the ending did feel so lackluster and just needed to be wrapped up. I don't really know, but I kind of agree with some other people that it just kind of felt weird, I guess. I know I'm being cryptic, but I just don't want to spoil or anything. But I feel like if you've read this book, you might know what I'm talking about. But I've seen so many people that have really loved this book and given it like 5 stars, 4.5 stars. So I don't know if this is just like like a me thing and that I'm just not the biggest fan of this type of thriller. This one did feel much more like a mystery type book. Very mild in terms of the thrilling aspects that you would expect in a thriller. Not a whole lot of plot twists. There obviously is some darker content matter, but just in terms of big, crazy things happening here and there, or big crazy reveals, there's just not that much of. Like, you kind of know where the story is going pretty much the whole time. I mean, there are some twists here and there, but for me, it was kind of easy to kind of see a lot of that stuff coming, I guess. And then the stuff that you didn't, for me, was just a little bit left confusing and ambiguous, and I think that that maybe was the point. But overall, I think maybe I'm gonna try reading some more non-domestic thrillers, because maybe this is just kind of a domestic thriller thing in general. And since I'm still fairly newish to the thriller genre, I think I need to just like expand my horizons a little bit more within the genre and really see what I like. I did really like the thriller Goodnight Beautiful, which was also, if I'm not mistaken, a domestic thriller, but that one had much more psychological elements and massive plot twists, and I think that's why I really loved that one in general. And maybe some people aren't the biggest fans of massive plot twists or whatnot, but that's just what I really like, especially when you don't necessarily see them coming, but then when you look back, the signs were there the whole time. That's just really fun to me, and that's the type of thrillers I like to read. I like to be shocked, and I like to just like stare at the page like, ah! So that's what I did in Goodnight Beautiful. I do have 2 other Lisa Jewell books. I have Then She Was Gone and The Family Upstairs. So these are ones I'm gonna also read. It's hard to judge an author off of one book, and I feel like her writing style was good. Like, I like the way she writes, but I just wasn't a big fan of that story in particular. So we'll see if I like some of her other thrillers. So that was 5 books in total, the month of January. I feel like it was a good reading month. I'm trying not to put like pressure on myself, I guess, to read a certain amount of books per month. Like, I'm very much a mood reader. I'm very much reading when I feel like it, I guess. Like, I listen to a lot of audiobooks now just as I'm doing activities in the background, and I feel like that has helped me a lot to just read more without having to physically dedicate time to sit there and read a book. Even though I love sitting there reading a book, but sometimes I have other stuff I gotta do because I'm busy. But for the most part, I'm just trying to, you know, read what I feel like when I can. Let me know down below what books you read this month, and I'll see you next time.